We have a health, science, and wellness panel coming up, which is going to be pretty exciting for those of you that really want to understand the science behind cannabis. The panel is jam-packed with leaders from various industries, and we are thrilled to have them here today. And equally as thrilled, we are to have it moderated by Graham Jones, one of the Cannalists that you know. And I'd also like to make sure that we thank BMO, Bank of Montreal, for sponsoring this panel that you're about to hear today. Graham Jones is one of the 3 founding members of the Cannalists, and he's affectionately referred to as the scientist, or last night I might have called him the doctor. He's seasoned in providing astute financial and qualitative analysis of the cannabis industry. Graham's research background provides a dose of science to encourage critical thinking, especially for those interested in evaluating the scientific claims that are being made by the cannabis companies. Graham also hosts a monthly Q&A science session on the Cannalists Reddit page. So without any further ado, please welcome Graham Jones to the stage.
So this morning we heard about how to grow cannabis from our operations panel. We had Rosie talk about cannabis extraction and processed products. And in the science and wellness panel, what we're going to discuss is advanced manufacturing and products derived from those advanced manufacturing. So these are products that are currently available for consumption in the States, to a more limited extent in Canada, and we're lucky enough to have representation from both sides of the border to give us a more diverse perspective on what the 2 different markets look like and getting these products through the various regulatory hurdles. So I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Guy Chamberland, please.
Sure. I'm Guy Chamberland. I'm the CEO and CSO of TetraBioPharma. TetraBioPharma is a biotech company developing prescription drugs. We do not grow cannabis. We actually are in a partnership with Afria, who provides us with the raw materials.
I'm Gordon Hagen. I'm a lead chemist at Cronos Group and project coordinator of the Ginkgo partnership we have. So I got the extraction department up and running at Cronos Group, and now I'm just overseeing a lot of the R&D activities when it pertains to chemistry. Yeah.
My name is Jeremy Riggle. I'm Chief Science Officer for Mary's Medicinals out of Denver, Colorado. I found out I was coming to this on Friday, and it's been a nice trip. Anyway, I lead all the internal quality control tests that we do on our products, and then I also lead the research and development of new products.
My name is Loren DeFalco. I'm partner and head of research at CB1 Capital. We're a long-short hedge fund focused on cannabinoid wellness. So I'm not a doctor like some of them up here, but I'm going to give you a little bit of my background to help you better understand how I fit in. So for the last 20 years, I've been involved in finance, mostly on the advisory side. And 10 years ago, I had an unfortunate incident of a massive seizure coming back from a business trip. Ended up waking up in an ambulance, was asked a bunch of questions, didn't know anything, so went to the neurologist the next morning, had an EEG done, and I was told I had seizure activity and I had to start taking this medication in order to be able to drive my car. Taking that medication caused all kinds of side effects. I ended up being stacked up on 5 meds at least in total just to deal with those side effects. And what ended up happening was just a decline in my cognitive abilities. I literally could not process information the way I used to. And I just knew this wasn't a good long-term solution, so I started to look for another answer and found all this research being done over in Israel, Italy, Spain, and a host of other countries in regards to this endocannabinoid system. So as I started to dig down, I started to apply the science. And as you know, these omega-3 fatty acids, some of you may know, they bind to CB2 receptors for an anti-inflammatory response. And when you exercise at certain heart rates, you produce cannabinoids, depending on your age, at certain heart rates. And so I did that, took copious amounts of hemp food, copious amounts of CBD, and a year later had another EEG done and was shown to be seizure-free. Was able to get off my meds, and I've been med-free and seizure-free for a decade now, and spent that time looking at it from the point of view. We trademarked this line, it's not about getting high, it's about getting well, because we firmly believe that. So I spent the last 10 years reading everything I could, and in fact I went to night school for a master's in mental health just to be more credible on this, and 9 credits short, but almost finished, but ended up learning so much, and now that everything's starting to develop, it's getting very encouraging. Speaking with Guy before genius. I mean, this whole panel is very smart. So I'm encouraged by what's been going on. I'm encouraged by the science coming out. We believe the clinical efficacy will drive this market, you know, the bifurcated market, the adult use nutraceutical, and the FDA regulatory. We believe that the clinical pathway will drive this pathway way higher when people realize what this really is all about. So sorry to keep going on, but that's that.
I think we're all excited to see the diversity of processed products that can come out of this industry. So why don't we start off by talking about some of the processed products that already exist. Jeremy, can you talk about Mary's Medicinals?
Sure. Yeah, so Mary's Medicinals, they've really been great to work with. They're very science-focused. I get the opportunity to go to conferences all over the world and stay up to date on the latest developments and clinical trials of kind of exploiting the endocannabinoid system for human health. And their focus was primarily on alternative or different routes of administration for delivering the drug, whether that be CBD, THC, whatever. So some of the products that we're kind of most known for include transdermal delivery. So we have a number of different transdermal products, including patches. We have 5 or 6 different patches, 5 or 6 different cannabinoids in patch form. We've also developed transdermal gels. Just recently, in collaboration with a pain doctor in Denver, we created a pharmaceutical-grade transdermal delivery vehicle and infused it with CBD, and we've been starting to get that to market. The funny thing is he was actually kind of on his own mad scientisting this product in his basement. And then he learned about Mary's, we got in touch and kind of fine-tuned it, made sure we were getting the dose right, make sure we were testing the delivery system. So we have a number of transdermal products. We also have a number of topical products. So not a lot of people know, but your skin, what we're learning about the skin is it kind of has its own set of, or its own endocannabinoid system. So it also, in addition to playing a role in central nervous system health and immune system, the endocannabinoid system plays a role in skin physiology or skin pathophysiology. So we're currently developing some cosmetic healing products. I think there was a question earlier about female-centric cannabis products. So it turns out my CEO is a female. So we've been in the process of developing a whole line of healing consumer products primarily for females. So those are our main types of products that we have right now under Mary's.
Of course, in Canada, we're limited to what we can do. So I'm wondering if, Guy, you could talk about some of the products we're allowed to make and put through various systems.
Well, for us, we operate under the Food and Drug Act, so we actually always ignored ACMPR and any of the cannabis acts because we just went down the path. Every other narcotic that became a drug went down. So we work as well in the FDA, which is an Interstate Commerce Act. But we've been developing even dried cannabis as a prescription drug with both the FDA and Health Canada. And we've done cannabis oils as well that we're working. We're working on 3 different ratios. And then on the other side, we also have synthetics that we're developing as ocular drugs. We're targeting painful dry eye and ocular pain and inflammation with various ratios of THC, CBD, and some unique cannabinoids that we haven't disclosed what they are yet. We also have orphan drug statuses, so we're basically just trailing behind GW.
Gordon, do you have any products you're developing at the moment?
Sure, yeah. To add on to the skincare that you were just talking about a moment ago, we have a key partnership with Technion University in Israel. So we're working with 2 professors there, Dr. Mary and Dr. Foxy. And Dr. Foxy is a world leader in stem cell research, specifically skin stem cells. So he has all the in vitro and in vivo cell lines to study wound healing and psoriasis. And Dr. Mary, his expertise is minor cannabinoids. So he's developed methods to detect and quantify over 100 different cannabinoids. So between both of them, we're studying the endocannabinoid system in skin cell models and developing a lot of really cool formulations and products out of that. So it's really exciting and cool research. So.
Or Loren, are there any formulations that you've identified as being pretty interesting when it comes to exploratory clinical trials?
Well, for the exploratory clinical trials, I was speaking with you before about one of the companies we had looked at that has a THC compound attaching it to a glycoside. It's a cannaboside. It's a new chemical entity, and it essentially is like a magnet for the gut, where the indication being pediatric IBS, pediatric Crohn's, pediatric colitis, They don't want to get the kids high, so what they're showing preclinically, and they're going to have their clinical trial start Q1, preclinically they've shown it didn't cross the blood-brain barrier in a significant way, and they want to see if that can replicate for little kids. That's a tremendous formulation. The other types of formulations that aren't clinical that are interesting, because I think most people here are familiar with the flour and the oil, the Canadian products. What we see in the U.S. a year ago, the difference between now and a year ago is tremendous just in the innovation, and we're starting to see those minor cannabinoids. So, there's 140 at least of these cannabinoids, THC and CBD being the two major ones. And then there's stuff like CBN, that's a sedative. There's stuff like THCV that has a component that not, suppresses hunger but still gets you high. So there's a THCV cartridge that was introduced last week in San Diego retail, which is new. And then they're working on Delta-8. They're working on all these minor cannabinoids. The question becomes, what happens when they get down deeper into the really small cannabinoids, because we've never taken those at high amounts. And that question I do wonder, but they are innovating and doing things that a year ago we didn't see and probably won't see here for at least a year.
Mm-hmm. And to jump on that too, it seems like there's an endless possibility of derivatives and prodrugs too. You talked about the glycosides, but even acetylating all of them, that just opens up this huge exploratory window of, what can we do with cannabinoids? Like all the classical drug discovery and combinational chemistry that we can do with traditional cannabinoids. So there's over 100, and then we can do derivatives of that too to explore that. So it's a whole world of possibilities and products that, is yet to be explored.
So anyone tried combining cannabinoids with terpenes yet and trying to put those as processed products into the medicinal market?
Well, we have 2 prescription drugs that have both. So you have the cannabinoids and the terpenes. Health Canada and the FDA force us to track all the minor cannabinoids and the terpenes. So we actually have a fingerprint for each product, and we know what the amounts are, even in the blood of patients.
Interesting. Are there any other minor cannabinoid products that people on the panel are interested in or excited about?
I love Mary's patches for CBD. I suffered with migraines most of my life, and after trying that CBD patch, it was 15 minutes, it was gone. It was a miracle for me. So, that type of stuff really excites me. To not smoke it and to be able to get that benefit is tremendous.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole idea behind transdermal delivery. So you don't have to smoke, you don't have to expose yourself to these pyrolysis products, which you all know are carcinogens. You can do it discreetly. Mary's is also constantly looking for more minor cannabinoids. So we're one of the few companies in the States that actually does a CBN product now. So we have a CBN transdermal patch. We have a CBN transdermal gel pen. So you won't see a lot of people doing that. We've been dabbling in a Cbg tincture. That's kind of in development right now. It's tricky. And we heard some of the growers talk about it earlier. The issue that we're having with our supplier is just being able to, these cannabinoids as they are, they're essentially isomers of each other, so their physical chemical properties overlap, they're very similar, so it's really hard to isolate one particular cannabinoid in an amount that's useful. So, I think Ryan was talking about, well, not just Ryan, but other people were talking about getting the genetics right, so these plants will make these minor cannabinoids in higher amounts, and that, of course, will make it easier for us to be able to extract those cannabinoids and get them out there. So, we're constantly working on it. We're constantly looking for sources of these minor cannabinoids to make new products out of.
So when we're putting minor cannabinoids in products, they usually typically contain other cannabinoids just as in addition, because you can't separate them. So you'll have your THC and your CBD in part of that, and you're unable to remove it. So we can't really test those minor cannabinoids separately from these other major cannabinoids.
Well, sorry, yeah, there are methods for separating them. Mm-hmm. They're not very cost effective. Right?
It's not practical.
Exactly, and not very practical. So for research purposes, for sure, we can start isolating single cannabinoids and all the isomers and derivatives of them. But yeah, for a production scale, that's the challenge. And I think that's a great segue to just kind of introduce our Ginkgo project that we have going on. So Cronos Group has, strategically partnered with Ginkgo Bioworks to create biosynthetic organisms that produce single cannabinoids one at a time. So we started out with just 8 different cannabinoids: THC, CBD, CBC, CBG, and then the varins of that, so the shorter carbon chain, so THCV. So they're going to be producing, industrial amendable biosynthetic organisms that are producing these THCVs. And the whole business side of it is linked to these key performance milestones. So we need a kilo of that THCV for less than $1,000, right? And that's the equity release milestone right there. So that's their goal. So then, hitting those goals and releasing those minor cannabinoids, we can start supplying these research projects and, developing really advanced minor cannabinoid formulations and products using biosynthesis instead of traditional cultivation, where it's impossible to get these minor cannabinoids.
Cool. I wonder if we can talk about some of the challenges with pushing cannabis-derived products through the clinical trial system. So, Guy, can you start us off?
Sure. For us today, it's down to an art. So we've been doing it since 2016. The challenge is not getting the trial approved. It's when you were dealing with getting the Section 56. So that's why that limited most universities and even professors of being able to do clinical research. So it's not just, say, once you get through the ethics, clinical trial, Health Canada, if you're able to justify the safety to the patient, they'll authorize your trial, but then you have to convince them of how it's going to move. So in our case, we would move it from AFRIA to a facility that would then transform it, but both have to have a not a dealer's license, and then for us, the establishment has to be a dealer's license and then has to go to the clinic that needs the exemption to hold it and to dispense it to the patient. And so the patient wouldn't get arrested by the RCMP. They had to have the exemption to cover their use at home. So all of those required the minister signing off. And it took about, the initial times, it was about a 4 to 8 week process. By the end, before legalization, we were down to about 2 weeks with Health Canada to getting them through. And it's the same type of exercise in the States. You go from the FDA approval, IRB approval, and then work with the DA to do the exact same thing.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the drugs that are being pushed in the U.S. are under orphan status, correct? There isn't anything that's being sought through the actual clinical trial systems to get up to your 1,200 patients with your phase 3.
There's us.
There's you?
Yeah, we've been working since 2016 with the FDA.
Oh, perfect.
We have it jurisdiction granted by the Office of the Commissioner, and we've been working with the Drug Division into bringing our first product to the market as a prescription drug.
How far are you through your clinical trial system?
We're in phase 3 right now.
Phase 3 right now. Impressive.
Yep.
Loren, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the clinical trial kind of atmosphere in the U.S.
Sure. So we're fortunate enough to have Dr. Ethan Russo on our advisory board, who is ran clinical trials for GW Pharmaceuticals for over a decade. So we get to bounce all our ideas off of him, and some of the indications that he's talking about. He had a peer-reviewed journal published last week in Frontiers, and he talks about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, GBM, which is aggressive brain cancer, glioblastoma multiforme, and then there's the fourth one was TBI, traumatic brain injury. So he feels that those are the indications that should be sought after through the regulatory pathway. Very good evidence to support that they're preclinically as well as anecdotally. But in terms of the trial that I'm excited about is GW's current trial for GBM, which is in phase 2. Their placebo, randomized double-blind placebo, was alive for 369 days. It was only a 21-person trial, 10 on one arm, 11 on the other. But still, phase 2 randomized double-blind placebo, where the GW, the Sativex arm, now as of 2 months ago is alive 662 days versus placebo at 369. And this is significant. And we're still waiting for the full readout of the trial that we're supposed to get, according to them, soon. But we think, again, that this is the type of information that will drive the entire sector to another level once people realize what this really is.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, we looked at the GW data, and we're obviously competing against them because we have patents for the use in GBM and other cancers as well as orphans. And, we're pretty active in that space and trying to develop products that will be, how could I say, unique. And if you go back to how pharma developed oncology drugs, there's technologies out there that you can selectively deliver the cannabinoids to the specific tumor that you want and even limit the toxicity in the high doses you may need. But these are going to be basically induce apoptosis and induce an anti-androgenic effect in the tumors. And I think that's what GW showed. They showed doubling of the survival, and other universities in Canada have shown that patients that were smoking cannabis during radiation therapy had actually stabilized the mass. It wasn't growing anymore, and they were disease-free. And that's significant in a cancer patient.
Sorry, could you tell us about some of Mary's Medicinals clinical trials? I know we were talking earlier.
Yeah. We did a clinical trial a little over a year ago. Our experience is a little bit different than GW or GE's, insofar as we're not a pharmaceutical company, but we wanted to kind of prove concept, and we wanted to do it legitimately. So for us, it was kind of a struggle, and it was a really expensive process. Jumping through the hoop, getting the IRB approval, which, as far as we were concerned with a product like that, it was somewhat unheard of to actually get IRB approval for this clinical study. And the idea was just to, again, a proof of concept, to prove that our transdermal delivery method did indeed push the API, in this case CBD, across the stratum corneum and into the bloodstream. So, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle finding, in Denver, it was a struggle finding patients who weren't consumers. Most of the people we encountered were consumers, so that was a difficult issue. It was a struggle finding a doctor who would touch it. Most of the doctors there, or at least most of the ones that we dealt with to begin with, there's always this kind of inherent fear, and this goes with the universities as well, of the feds coming in, because the Fed stance on it obviously is incompatible with Colorado's Colorado stance on it. So there was a lot of worry that the feds at any time could come in and put the completely end of practice, remove funding for universities. So for our experience, it was different. It was difficult, but we jumped through the hoops, and it ended up being quite expensive. So it's we've kind of changed our focus somewhat. I mean, we definitely think it's important, and we want to do that, but it's just not quite as easy for us to do it as a manufacturing company as it is for a pharmaceutical company that's got a lot of money in on it.
Okay, I wonder if we could talk a bit more about the kind of R&D and kind of future research that we think might come out of the cannabis industry with regard to processed products. We've talked a bit about minor cannabinoids and the formulations that you could have with the major cannabinoids. Are there any other forms or formats that you're excited for?
Well, for us, obviously, it's on the ocular space. So we're obviously targeting delivering into even the eye tissue with some specific technologies that will enhance absorption. Because right now, if you apply basically the THC to the eye, it just basically sits in the cornea. But we want to get beyond that to target some of the blood vessels. So there are technologies that we're working on licensing that will allow us to get the THC across into the blood. And we're going to be able to target special basically some of the vascular diseases of the eye, which is a huge market.
Gordon, any?
Yeah, sure. One project we're actively looking in right now is vape formulation technology and formulating specific terpenes back in with the cannabinoids. So Cronos Group acquired Peace Naturals. Peace Naturals was one of the first licensed producers in Canada. So we have a wealth of patient history. Anytime we've ever sold a product, our patients have filled out a survey about feeling and mood and everything like that. So we've luckily got a huge data set of over 60,000 points. And we can point to a cultivar and correlate it to specific moods and feelings. Now with the power of working with Dr. Mary, we understand all the cannabinoids and all the terpenes in our different cultivars. So we're using machine learning to understand how can we formulate the perfect terpene cannabinoid mix in a vape pen to give you a very specific feeling. So that's a project that I'm working on that I'm really excited about, and seeing how that evolves and kind of vape pens we're going to get from that. So that's really cool.
Jeremy, I know we've already talked a lot about the various products you're formulating. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss that you have in the books that you're not releasing yet?
Yeah, well, it's, to me, in the U.S., it's a lot different. I mean, I know we've kind of talked about this because there really are no, well, depends on where you're at in the U.S. Where we're at in the U.S. in Colorado, there are no constraints. So I really see cannabis being in almost everything, which is kind of crazy, but I can see it, being in all of your consumer products, deodorants, soaps, shampoos, so on and so forth. Just because First of all, it's non-toxic. There's hardly any, if any, known toxicity. Second of all, the endocannabinoid system is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. So I really see an explosion. And I mean, I see it now in terms of the vast array of different products that come to market all the time. It's just a constantly growing market space in certain states in the U.S. So I see it everywhere eventually, honestly. We'll see what happens, but it's just blowing up.
Loren?
Well, before we were talking about David Mary from Techion, and there was a conference I was at last week where he was presenting some data. And this gets into the minor cannabinoids. This is the part that really excites us because it's a treasure trove of 140 different compounds that have different unique therapeutic properties, and we only know about 8 or 9 of them, too much about any of them. So I think, as David Mary at this presentation, he showed different cancer slides and why one strain or chemovar would work for a triple-negative breast or work for colon cancer, but wouldn't work for pancreatic. And what his study showed is when he had a different strain or chemovar, it would be effective for pancreatic. And so why is that? And what we think it has to be the minor cannabinoids, or perhaps the terpenes, but there's something that's going on in there. And that's what we really want to identify. And I think through the minor cannabinoid production through biosynthetics at a low cost for API, that's how you really get to do that, because I don't know how you can extract these minor cannabinoids at the levels you need to test them at, unless you go through that route. So
exactly.
I think that's the most exciting thing is when they start to really dig down. And maybe there's nothing to some of them, but we know there's something, because why would different strains have different effects? It has to be the constituents within the strain. It's not like wonder twin powers activate where, there is a synergistic effect that can go on, but we have to identify what that is.
And it's just that it's really the potential that we see in all the different cannabinoids and their therapeutic uses in cannabis that for us, I believe, is why we got into this industry and what makes it so exciting for us. Jeremy, you mentioned you see cannabinoids in all consumer goods just because of the ubiquity of the endocannabinoid system. Does the rest of the panel share his enthusiasm for the ubiquity of it? And personally, I think we see water-soluble cannabinoids already coming about in the States and technology being developed in Canada.
So Lagunitas introduced a beer, which I was surprised. I tried the drinks, but it was always garbage. I didn't think it was a possibility to get this. They actually did something. It's not the best beer, but there's no taste. I mean, all you taste is the hops and the sparkling water and the terps that they throw in there. And that to me was very impressive. So I think from an adult use nutraceutical standpoint, the ability to infuse drinks like that is huge. They just weren't able to do that a few years ago or it hadn't been out there for them.
Yeah, I guess that's why this panel is called the Science and Wellness Panel, as I think it'll be many decades before we actually separate what is science from what is wellness in this industry. How are we doing for time?
Sorry, I got so fascinated I stopped following. Are we good?
Yeah, you're fine.
We're fine? Okay. So I guess we'll move on to the Q&A section. So I can't see. Left. Okay.
I just have a really quick question for the panel. And I was listening to the commentary about that, there's so many problems with the federal regulations for testing and doing pharmaceutical type investigations. Why are we not in Canada promoting American interests to come to Canada? Because you won't have to worry about the federal government arresting you or doing something to debunk your work. Has there been any thoughts on that as an industry approaching big, large pharma in the U.S. and taking advantage of our relationships?
Well, for me, I mean, I understand the comment that some people find the DA a hurdle. For pharmas, if you've been working in regulatory affairs, for me, it's just a different set of regulations, and it's kind of a discipline, so you get used to dealing with them, you establish your contacts, you establish your credibility, and then as you win confidence in them, the first file is always longer, then the second is faster, and the third is faster. So it is doable. I mean, Schedule I molecules have been developed by pharma in the United States all the time. The challenge for, I think, this industry has been addressing what we've lived it with Health Canada. For example, they come and we wanted to do a first capsule oil trial in humans, and to me that was the most brainless decision when I looked at how many capsules were sold under ACMPR in Canada, but yet the first question that came from the medical reviewers at Health Canada, where's your rat data, where's your dog data, did you follow the ICH M3? And you sit back and you say, well, I mean, people are buying this in kilos. And they said, yeah, but we still need the evidence to authorize your trial. So we eventually managed to get the scientific data to convince them we weren't going to kill anybody, but that's a typical hurdle that if you're not ready to talk the language of the regulators, you will find it hard. Otherwise, it's the same obstacles in Canada as in the US. And here it's not the DA, it's called was called Health Canada's Controlled Substance Division. Now it's moved over to the cannabis people. But I mean, it's still the same process. You'll need a license to do whatever you want to do in research.
I got more of a comment, I guess, on the question. When we talk about biosynthesis of cannabinoids versus plant production, we call these things minor cannabinoids because typically they're found in small amounts in your typical cannabis varieties. But through breeding, we have been able to create, for example, 15% plus CBGA varieties and THCV and CBDV above 10% quite easily. And as the regulations change and we can start producing these things sun-grown, not even under the ACMPR strict regulations, moreover under the hemp regulations, we're going to be able to produce these minor cannabinoids for a lot less than, in my opinion, a lot less than synthetic production.
That's a good point, and that's the biggest concern and the biggest feedback we get with this project that we have with Ginkgo, but you would have to grow, harvest, dry, extract, and purify a cannabinoid for like 10 cents a dried gram or 8 cents a dried gram, just to be equal to the equity milestone release that we have for the performance of this biosynthesis. So yeah, okay, let's project forward in Colombia. Maybe 10 years you can grow and dry and extract and purify for 10 cents a gram of cannabis, but we're going to be there before that, right? And we're going to be supplying a bunch of minor cannabinoids. And then speaking about the breeding, I don't know if it's as easy or straightforward as you're saying. With the biosynthesis, we can construct the exact biosynthetic pathway we want from scratch, the way we want it. Whereas with the plant, it's one of the most complex genomes to work with, right? And breeding hasn't been that great in the cannabis industry up to this point. It's been in the underground market, there's not really stable genetics. So yes, we have marker-assisted breeding. We have some of the most talented people in the world working on cannabis breeding right now. But why not do synthetic biology and build these pathways from scratch to optimize it for the exact product we want so we can supply our pharmaceutical partners with pharmaceutical-grade APIs cheaper right now than you can cultivating, or as cheap as cultivation in the future. It also gives us the access to choose whatever cannabinoid we want in the future. So if we're talking about CBTL, some made-up cannabinoid that's on the list of 200 that we don't really know any genetics that make it, we can biosynthetically produce it, right? So that's the advantage of biosynthesis.
Well, I think you got another advantage. I think it's going to be the mass production. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about an agricultural crop, and you need to supply a drug for every country around the world, yep. I don't think we can grow enough in Canada.
Exactly.
So that's always going to be the limitation.
So hopefully I'm back here in 2 years talking about fermentation instead of greenhouses like Dan's presentation today, right? So, yeah.
It's also important to note that not all the cannabinoids need to be made biosynthetically. We can actually do conversion from THC to CBN. So you can make lots of CBN if you have a stock supply of THC. It's the same for some of the other minor cannabinoids. So there will be some chemical synthesis that comes into play at some point for maybe conversion of some of the more common cannabinoids to some of the less common cannabinoids.
And I think it's really more, for now at least, suited for API through the pharmaceutical route or cosmetics as an ingredient. I'm not sure it translates yet to ingestible products, with the labeling, and that's the unknown. How do you label that? Mm-hmm. How do people respond to that labeling? So for the pharmaceutical API route, it's a no-brainer. Cosmetics, I believe that fits right in, and the question really becomes on the rest of it, which I don't know.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for about 20 minutes. Please take a look at our wonderful booths at the back and over to the side over there, and network with your peers. Thank you very much.